The rain over Manchester was relentless, a cold, gray curtain that turned the world into a blurred watercolor of grief. I stepped into St. Jude's Church with Sarah, my wife, her hand gripping mine so tightly her knuckles were white. The air inside was heavy, smelling of damp wool, old incense, and the cloying sweetness of lilies. It was the day of Julian's funeral. My younger brother, Julian Thorne, only 28 years old, lay motionless in the polished oak casket at the front of the nave. But I wasn't here just as a brother. To the congregation, I was Elias Thorne, 36, a detective inspector with the Greater Manchester Police, specializing in financial crimes. To the whispers circulating the pews, I was something far worse. As our footsteps clicked against the stone floor, the low murmur of prayer ceased. Heads turned. Eyes, cold and judging, bored into me. The silence that descended was so thick it felt physical, pressing against my chest like a sheet of lead. They looked at me as if I were a stranger, a stain defiling this sacred space. My father, Marcus Thorne, stood near the altar. He was a broad man, his face weathered from years running the family pub in Salford. When he saw me, his expression didn't just darken, it twisted. His eyes held a terrifying blend of despair and pure, unadulterated hatred. He clutched his prayer book as if he wanted to hurl it at me. "I wish it was you," Marcus's voice boomed, shattering the silence. It echoed off the vaulted ceiling, loud enough for the back rows to hear. "I wish it was you lying in that box, Elias." The words sliced through me, sharper than any knife. My heart constricted. I stood frozen, my throat parched. I knew grief drove men mad, but this was visceral. A ripple of murmurs spread through the pews. "That's the older brother," someone whispered. "The copper. The one who killed him." Those words stabbed at me, dragging my mind back 6 months, to the moment my life derailed. I hadn't killed Julian. Not really. But the truth was a tangled mess that no headline could capture. 6 months ago, I was investigating the Iron Ledger, a sophisticated syndicate laundering money across the north of England. I knew the network inside out, the shell companies, the crypto wallets, the drop sites. Then, a name popped up in the files that stopped my heart: Julian Thorne. I couldn't believe it. Julian was a drifter, a bit wild, but not a criminal. Yet the evidence was undeniable. CCTV footage, bank transfers, voice notes. Against protocol, I stayed on the case, convinced I could save him. I thought I could pull him out before the water got too deep. I was wrong. The memory of the raid played in my mind like a looped tape. The abandoned textile mill on the outskirts of the city. The rain, it was always raining. The armed response team breaching the doors. Chaos. Shouting. And then, Julian jumping out from behind a crate. He looked terrified. Pale, sweating, eyes darting like a trapped animal. But he had a gun. And he pointed it straight at my chest. "Julian, drop it." I had screamed, stepping into the line of fire, lowering my own weapon. "It's me. It's Elias." He didn't drop it. His hand trembled, his finger tightening on the trigger. I saw a flash of regret in his eyes, or maybe it was just fear. Before I could talk him down, a single crack of thunder rang out. Not from him. From the police marksman covering me. Julian fell. I held him as he bled out on the dirty concrete, his blood soaking my tactical vest. He died looking at me, his lips moving in a silent apology. "You murderer!" The scream brought me back to the church. My mother, Elena, broke from the front row. She was a small woman, usually composed, but now she was a whirlwind of black lace and fury. She charged at me before anyone could stop her. She didn't hug me. She clawed at me. Her fingernails raked across my cheek, drawing blood. "You killed my son. My Julian," she shrieked, her voice breaking into a guttural wail. "You jealous, heartless bastard. Are you even human?" Sarah tried to step in, panic in her eyes. "Elena, please. He's hurting too. Don't you speak to me." Elena spat, shoving Sarah aside with shocking strength. She turned back to me, her face contorted. Get out. You don't belong here. You aren't my son. You died to me the moment you let that bullet hit him. Mum, please, I choked out, the pain in my chest far worse than the stinging scratches on my face. I tried to save him. Liar. Marcus was beside her now, his presence looming over me. He pointed a shaking finger at the heavy oak doors. Get out, Elias. Before I kill you myself. The congregation watched in horrified fascination. Relatives I'd known since childhood turned their backs. Neighbors shook their heads. I was the Cain to Julian's Abel, the ambitious detective who sacrificed his own brother for a pat on the back from the force. I couldn't stay. I didn't want to turn Julian's final goodbye into a brawl. I squeezed Sarah's hand, signaling it was time. We turned and walked out, the sound of my mother's sobs chasing us down the aisle, mingled with the malicious whispers. Curse on this family. Monster. We stepped out into the Manchester rain, the heavy wooden doors thudding shut behind us, sealing us off from the warmth, the prayers, and the family I had just lost forever. We got into my car, the silence inside deafening. The rain drummed a frantic rhythm on the roof. I gripped the steering wheel, my hands shaking uncontrollably. Elias, Sarah whispered, her voice a soothing balm. She reached out, touching my shoulder. They don't mean it. It's the grief. They're looking for someone to blame. No, I said, my voice sounding hollow, foreign to my own ears. That wasn't just grief, Sarah. That was hatred. Pure hatred. I started the engine, the wipers slashing back and forth. I drove away from the church, away from the grave where they would bury my brother without me. But as I navigated the wet streets, a cold knot of suspicion began to tighten in my stomach, sitting alongside the guilt. My parents had always favored Julian, yes. They coddled him, excused his mistakes. But this reaction, it was excessive. It was defensive. It felt less like the lash of sorrow and more like the frantic snapping of a cornered animal. I tried to save him, I whispered again, more to myself than to Sarah. I know, she said. But my father's words echoed in the confines of the car. I wish it was you. I looked in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see the church fading into the mist, but all I saw were my own tired eyes. I had lost my brother. Today, I had lost my parents. But as the detective in me began to wake up from the shock, I realized something didn't add up. Why did Julian have a gun? Why did he point it at me? And why did my parents look at me not just with anger, but with fear? I didn't know the answer yet. But I knew one thing. I wasn't going to find peace in that church. I would only find it in the truth. And I would tear Manchester apart to find it. Work was the only anesthetic that worked. Silence was too loud. It let the memories of the funeral, the scratching of my mother's nails, the boom of my father's curse, seep back in. So, I chose the hum of the servers and the flickering fluorescent lights of the Greater Manchester Police Headquarters. It had been 3 days since I walked out of St. Jude's. I hadn't spoken to my parents. I hadn't slept more than 2 hours a stretch. Instead, I lived in the major fraud unit, drowning myself in the digital wreckage of the Iron Ledger. We had cut off one head of the Hydra during the raid where Julian died, but the beast was still breathing. The syndicate was still moving money. Millions of pounds were being washed through shell companies in Leeds, Liverpool, and Manchester, turning dirty drug money into clean real estate assets. Elias, go home, DCI Miller said, passing my desk with a mug of tea. You look like death warmed up. I'm fine, boss, I lied, not looking away from my monitor. I found a ghost node. A transfer hub we missed in the initial sweep. It's small, domestic, but the volume is staggering. Miller sighed but didn't argue. He knew I had nothing else to go home to. I focused back on the screen. The Iron Ledger used a technique called layering, moving money through so many accounts it became untraceable. But they had gotten lazy. Or arrogant. I found a recurring destination for microtransactions. Small sums, barely noticeable, but thousands of them. They all funneled into a single encrypted server before vanishing into offshore accounts. I ran a trace on the server's physical access point. The software spun, cross-referencing ISP logs and cell tower pings. A location appeared on the map. A red dot in the heart of Salford. I frowned, leaning closer. The address was familiar. Too familiar. 14 Cooper Street. My stomach dropped. That wasn't a warehouse or a shell office. That was the Weaver's Arms. My parents' pub. I stared at the screen, my breath catching in my throat. It had to be a mistake. Or maybe Julian had set up a rig in the cellar without them knowing. That had to be it. Julian was the criminal. My parents were just a pub landlord and a housewife. They were grieving victims, not financial masterminds. Computer, I whispered, my voice trembling. Access local CCTV for 14 Cooper Street. Rear alley camera. The GMP had cameras everywhere. I pulled the feed from a council camera overlooking the back entrance of the pub, dating back 2 weeks prior to the raid. The grainy black and white footage flickered to life. I watched fast-forwarded rain slash against the cobbles. Then, the back door of the pub opened. My mother, Elena, stepped out. She wasn't wearing her apron. She was in a heavy coat, looking left and right with a sharpness I rarely associated with her. A black saloon car pulled up. A man got out. I recognized him instantly. Silas Vane, a known enforcer for the Ledger. A man who broke fingers for late payments. My mother didn't look afraid. She didn't recoil. She reached into the doorway and pulled out a heavy canvas duffel bag. She handed it to Vane, said something that made the thug nod respectfully, and then patted his arm. It was a casual gesture. Maternal thumbs. The kind of pat she used to give me when I finished my vegetables. I sat back, the air leaving my lungs in a rush. That wasn't the body language of a victim being extorted. That was the body language of a partner. This can't be real, I muttered. I needed audio. I logged into the active surveillance archive. During the investigation into Julian, we had secured a warrant to tap the phones of anyone frequently contacting the suspects. I had never listened to my parents' calls because I assumed they were just worried checks on their wayward son. I pulled up a file from the night before the raid. Caller, Marcus Thorne. I put on my headphones, my hands shaking so hard I could barely click the mouse. The line clicked. My father's voice filled my ears, gruff and familiar. Is it done? Marcus asked. The drop is secure, a distorted voice replied. But the police are sniffing around the warehouse. Julian is getting jittery, Marcus. He's talking about walking away. My heart hammered against my ribs. He doesn't get to walk away, Marcus snapped. The warmth I associated with my father, the man who taught me to pour a pint, who cheered at my football games, was gone. In its place was cold steel. He's the face of the operation. If he runs, he exposes the Weaver network. Talk to him. Remind him what happens to rats. He's your son, Marcus, the voice said. He's an asset, my father replied, his voice devoid of emotion. And right now, he's a liability. If Elias gets too close, well, we can't have a family reunion in prison, can we? Fix it. I ripped the headphones off, throwing them onto the desk. The plastic clattered loudly in the quiet office. I felt like I was going to vomit. The room spun. The hate in the church, the curse, the scratching, it all made sense now. They weren't angry because I killed their innocent son. They were angry because I had destroyed their best lieutenant. They were terrified because, with Julian dead, the firewall protecting them was gone. They weren't grieving parents. They were the architects. They had groomed Julian. They had fed him to the wolves to keep their own hands clean. And when the walls closed in, they were ready to sacrifice him, or me, to save the empire they built on dirty money. I sat there for a long time, staring at the red dot on the map. The pub where I grew up. The place that smelled of stale beer and furniture polish. It was the heart of the rot. Tears pricked my eyes, hot and angry. I wiped them away furiously. There was no room for sadness now. Sadness was for the brother I had lost. For the parents, there was only the law. I stood up, grabbing the file, the USB drive with the footage, and the audio logs. I walked straight to DCI Miller's office. The glass door was open. He looked up, startled by my expression. "Elias? What is it?" I dropped the file onto his desk. It hit the wood with a heavy thud. "The Iron Ledger," I said, my voice steady, cold as the grave. "I found the top of the pyramid." Miller opened the file. He looked at the photos, the transcripts. His eyes widened. He looked up at me, his face pale. "Elias, this is your parents." "No," I said, feeling a part of my soul wither and die. "Those are the suspects." "You know what this means?" Miller asked softly. "If we move on this, there's no going back. It's a conflict of interest. You can't be part of the arrest." "I have to be," I insisted. "I need to look them in the eye. I need them to know that I know." Miller hesitated, then nodded slowly. He reached into his drawer and pulled out the warrant forms. He signed them and pushed the paper toward me. "Do it." I picked up the pen. The ink was black. Permanent. I looked at the names typed on the dotted line. Marcus Thorne. Elena Thorne. I thought of Julian, bleeding out on the concrete, apologizing for a sin that wasn't fully his. I thought of the way my mother looked at me in the church. I pressed the pen to the paper and signed my name. With that stroke of the pen, I didn't just authorize a raid. I orphaned myself. "Get the tactical team," I said, turning for the door. "We move at midnight." Midnight in Manchester was a different beast than the daylight hours. The rain had ceased, leaving the streets slick and black, reflecting the street lamps like oil. The tactical convoy moved silently through the deserted streets of Salford, a line of unmarked gray vans slicing through the mist. I sat in the command vehicle, the Kevlar vest heavy against my chest, pressing against the spot where my heart hammered a frantic, irregular rhythm. Beside me, DCI Miller checked his sidearm, the metallic click loud in the confined space. "Last chance, Elias," Miller said, his voice low. "You stay in the van. We secure the premises. You don't need to see the takedown." "I signed the warrant," I said, staring out the window as the familiar brick facade of the Weaver's Arms came into view. The pub was dark, the neon sign buzzed off, but I knew the layout better than anyone. I knew which floorboards creaked. I knew the escape route through the cellar. I need to be the one to close the book. Miller didn't argue. He signaled the team leader. "Move in." We spilled out of the vans. The air was cold, biting at my exposed skin. 12 armed response officers, clad in black, moved with liquid precision toward the heavy oak door of the pub. I followed in their wake, a ghost haunting his own childhood home. The silence held for a heartbeat, a terrible, suspended second where the world took a breath. Then the enforcer, battering ram swung. The wood splintered with a sound like a gunshot. The door gave way. "Police! Armed police!" The shout was a collective roar, shattering the night. Flashlights cut through the gloom of the taproom, sweeping over the brass pumps and the sticky carpet. I stepped over the threshold, the smell of stale beer and lemon polish hitting me instantly, the scent of home, now twisted into the scent of a crime scene. Clear left, clear right, stairs. The boots of the officers thundered up the narrow staircase leading to the living quarters. I followed, my hand resting on my holster, though I prayed I wouldn't have to draw. We reached the landing. The door to the living room, the room where we opened Christmas presents, where I watched football with my dad, was kicked open. "Get down. Police. Show me your hands." The scene inside was a tableau of chaos. My parents weren't asleep. They were wide awake. The room was littered with open boxes, stacks of cash bundled in rubber bands, and a shredder that was humming in the corner. They were cleaning house. Marcus stood by the fireplace, freezing as the laser sights danced across his chest. He was wearing his dressing gown, but his eyes were alert, predatory. Elena was by the desk, her hands hovering over a laptop. For a split second, they played the victims. "Don't shoot!" Elena screamed, throwing her hands up, her face crumpling into a mask of terror. "We're elderly. Don't hurt us. Someone broke in." "Identify yourself," an officer shouted. "Marcus Thorne. This is my wife." Marcus bellowed, feigning outrage. "What is the meaning of this? We are law-abiding citizens." Then I stepped through the doorway. The change in the room was instantaneous. It was like the temperature dropped 10 degrees. Elena's sobbing stopped abruptly. Marcus's feigned confusion hardened into a sneer that exposed his teeth. They saw the raid gear, the badge, and finally, the face of their eldest son. "You," Marcus spat. The venom in his voice was more shocking than the guns pointed at him. "You traitorous little rat." "Secure them," the team leader ordered. 2 officers moved in, forcing Marcus and Elena to their knees. My father struggled, thrashing against the grip of the officers, knocking a family photo off the mantelpiece. It shattered on the hearth, a picture of Julian. "Elias!" Elena shrieked, her voice shrill. "Tell them to stop. Tell them who we are." I walked to the center of the room. I looked down at them, seeing them not as giants of my childhood, but as small, vicious creatures caught in a trap of their own making. "I know exactly who you are," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. "You're the heads of the Iron Ledger. You're money launderers. Fraudsters." I paused, swallowing the lump in my throat. "And you're the reason Julian is dead. Don't you dare speak his name." Marcus roared, his face turning a mottled purple. "You killed him. You killed him to clear the way for your career, and now you're planting evidence to frame us to cover your tracks." "Check the laptop," I told the tech officer, ignoring my father. "And the safe behind the painting. The combination is 0-4-1-1-8-8. Julian's birthday." Marcus went still. The color drained from his face. He looked up at me, and for the first time, I saw genuine fear. Not of the police, but of me. Of the fact that I knew. "How?" he whispered. "I listened to the tapes, Dad," I said, using the word like a weapon. "I heard you order the hit. I heard you tell them to silence him." Elena let out a wail, a high-pitched sound of despair, but she didn't deny it. She glared at me, her eyes wet but burning with malice. "We did what we had to do to survive. The family comes first. You never understood that. You were always too soft. Too righteous." "The family?" I laughed, a bitter, dry sound. "You sacrificed your son for a ledger. You didn't protect the family. You ate it alive." I pulled the laminated card from my pocket. The caution. The words every officer learns by heart. The words I had recited 100 times to strangers. I never thought I would say them to the people who gave me life. "Marcus Thorne, Elena Thorne," I began, my voice echoing in the room where I learned to walk. "I am arresting you on suspicion of conspiracy to commit fraud, money laundering, and conspiracy to murder." "You're dead to me," Marcus screamed as the cuffs ratcheted tight around his wrists. "You hear me, Elias? You have no father. You have no home. You do not have to say anything," I continued, staring him dead in the eye. "But it may harm your defense if you do not mention when questioned something which you later rely on in court." "Judas," Elena hissed, spitting at my feet as she was hauled up. "My own flesh and blood. Anything you do say may be given in evidence," I finished. The officers dragged them out. They didn't go quietly. They kicked and screamed, cursing my name, dragging my reputation through the mud one last time. The sound of their resistance faded down the stairs, followed by the heavy thud of the van doors slamming shut outside. Then, silence returned. I was left alone in the living room. The laser sights were gone. The shouting was gone. There was just the hum of the shredder in the corner and the shattered glass of Julian's photo on the floor. I looked around the room. The beige wallpaper, The worn armchair, the smell of potpourri masking the rot beneath. It looked so normal. So mundane. I walked over to the mantelpiece and picked up the broken frame. I carefully removed the photo of Julian, brushing a shard of glass off his smiling face. He looked so young in the picture, so full of life, before they got their claws into him. "I got them, Jules," I whispered to the empty room. "I got them." But as I stood there in the ruins of my childhood, I didn't feel like a hero. I felt like a survivor of a shipwreck, standing on a deserted shore, watching the only vessel I had ever known sink beneath the dark waves. I turned off the light and walked out, leaving the door to the Weaver's arms wide open to the night. The interrogation room at GMP headquarters was a box of sterile silence, smelling faintly of bleach and nervous sweat. I stood behind the one-way mirror, my arms crossed, watching the dominoes fall. On the other side of the glass sat Silas Vane, the enforcer I had seen on the CCTV footage. He looked smaller without his heavy coat and the backdrop of a rainy Salford alley. He was handcuffed to the table, staring at a cup of lukewarm water like it was the only real thing left in the world. "I can't help you with the murder charge, Silas," DCI Miller said, sitting opposite him. Miller's voice was calm, reasonable. "But the fraud? The conspiracy? We can talk. If you give us the architects." Vane looked up. His eyes flicked to the mirror. He couldn't see me, but he knew I was there. The son of the boss. The man who brought the house down. "They aren't just fraudsters," Vane rasped. "Marcus, he's a vicious old bastard. You think he ran a pub? He ran a kingdom." "Tell us about the night of the raid," Miller pressed. "Tell us about Julian." Vane swallowed hard. "Julian was weak. He wanted out. He called me 3 hours before you kicked the doors in. Said he was going to turn himself in. Said he couldn't handle the guilt of lying to his brother anymore." My heart skipped a beat. "Julian did want out. What did you do?" Miller asked. "I called Marcus," Vane said quietly. "I told him the kid was cracking. And Marcus sent a voice note. To Julian's burner phone. 10 minutes before your team breached the warehouse." Vane leaned forward. "If you want to nail Marcus and Elena to the wall, find that phone. Find the recording. That's your smoking gun." I turned to the tech officer beside me. "We logged Julian's burner into evidence 6 months ago. It was encrypted." "Crack it," I ordered, my voice tight. "Now." It took 2 hours. 2 hours of pacing the corridor, drinking coffee that tasted like battery acid. When the tech officer finally waved me over, his face was grim. "We bypassed the encryption," he said, handing me a headset. "There's one unplayed message. Time-stamped 11:48 p.m. The night of the raid." I put the headset on. The world narrowed down to the space between my ears. I could play. My father's voice filled my head. It wasn't the angry boom from the church or the cold indifference from the wiretap. It was urgent, whispered, and terrifyingly precise. "Julian, Vane tells me you're getting cold feet. Listen to me very carefully. The police are coming. Elias is coming. He's not your brother tonight. He's the enemy. If he walks through that door, you put him down. Do you hear me? It's him or the business. It's him or your mother. Put a bullet in him, or don't bother coming home." The recording ended with a sharp click. I stood there, the silence of the office rushing back in, but I couldn't hear it. All I could hear was "put a bullet in him." It wasn't an accident. It wasn't a panic reaction. Julian hadn't raised that gun because he was a frightened criminal. He had raised it because our father had ordered him to execute me. And Julian, poor, brainwashed Julian, had hesitated. That hesitation was the only reason I was alive, and the reason he was dead. I ripped the headset off, feeling bile rise in my throat. "Bring them in," I whispered. They brought Marcus in first. He sat in the interrogation chair, chin high, defiant. He still thought he could bluster his way out of it. He thought it was just money laundering, white-collar crime, a few years in a minimum security facility. I walked into the room. I didn't sit. I stood over him, placing a small digital recorder on the steel table. What's this? Marcus sneered. More fabricated evidence? I didn't speak. I just pressed play. It's him or the business. Put a bullet in him. The color drained from Marcus's face so fast it looked like the blood had been siphoned out of him. His arrogance evaporated, replaced by the hollow, terrified look of a man watching his own coffin lid slam shut. That, Marcus stammered. That's taken out of context. I was stressed. I didn't mean. You ordered your son to kill your son, I said, my voice trembling with a rage so cold it felt like ice. Conspiracy to commit murder. Solicitation of murder. You're not going to a white-collar resort, Dad. You're going to die in a cage. Marcus slumped in his chair. He didn't look at me. He looked at the recorder, realizing that the technology he used to control his empire had just destroyed it. The trial at Manchester Crown Court was a spectacle. The public gallery was packed every single day. The press, who had vilified me only weeks before, now painted me as a tragic hero, the untouchable detective who chose the law over blood. I hated it. I hated every flashbulb, every sympathetic nod from the jury. The prosecution was ruthless. They laid out the iron ledger in intricate detail. The shell companies, the extortion, the drug money. But the centerpiece was the voice note. When they played it in court, a collective gasp went through the room. I watched my mother in the dock. She didn't cry this time. She sat stone-faced, staring at the wall, her hand gripping Marcus's. They looked like statues of fallen monarchs, refusing to acknowledge the ruin they had created. The defense tried to argue coercion, mental instability, anything to soften the blow. But the jury wasn't buying it. They deliberated for less than 4 hours. Guilty. The word rang out, repeated on every count. The judge, a stern woman with eyes like flint, looked down at my parents over her spectacles. Marcus and Elena Thorne, she said, her voice echoing in the high-ceilinged room. You corrupted your children. You perverted the course of justice. You ordered the execution of a police officer who happened to be your own son. There is no sentence harsh enough for the betrayal of the sacred trust of parenthood. She sentenced them to 30 years each. 30 years. They were in their 60s. It was a life sentence. As the guards moved to take them down to the cells, Marcus turned to look at the public gallery. He scanned the faces until he found mine. I expected anger. I expected cursing. Instead, he just looked at me with a blank, dead stare. There was no recognition. It was as if I were a stranger who had simply witnessed a traffic accident. He turned away and disappeared down the steps. I walked out of the courthouse into the blinding glare of the afternoon sun. A wall of reporters surged forward, microphones thrust into my face. Detective Thorne, how does it feel to see justice served? Elias, do you have a statement for your brother? Are you relieved? Relieved? I looked at them, at the hungry lenses and the scribbling pens. They wanted a soundbite. They wanted closure. But there was no closure. Justice had been served, yes. The iron ledger was broken. My parents were gone. My name was cleared. But Julian was still dead. And he died knowing his father wanted me dead too. No comment, I said, pushing through the crowd. I found Sarah waiting by the car, her eyes filled with tears. She didn't say anything, she just opened her arms. I stepped into her embrace, burying my face in her shoulder, shielding my eyes from the cameras. The world called me a hero. But as I stood there, holding on to the only family I had left, I felt like the loneliest man on earth. The war was over, but the house was burned to the ground. HM Prison Manchester, known locally as Strangeways, loomed like a fortress of red brick and barbed wire against the pale sky. It was a place designed to strip a man of his dignity, to reduce him to a number. Today, it held the 2 people who had given me my name. It had been 3 months since the sentencing. I hadn't planned to come. Sarah had begged me not to, fearing it would reopen wounds that had barely begun to scab over. But I needed to see them one last time. Not for forgiveness, I knew that was a well dry of water, but for confirmation. I needed to know that the monsters who haunted my nightmares were just flesh and blood, locked behind steel doors. I sat in the visitation room, the plastic chair bolted to the floor. The air smelled of industrial cleaner and stale despair. The door on the far side buzzed. 2 guards escorted them in. Marcus looked smaller. The prison grays hung loosely on his frame, stripping away the illusion of the powerful landlord who commanded respect with a look. Elena walked with a shuffle, her hair gray and unkempt, stripped of the dye and hairspray that had been her armor. They sat on the other side of the reinforced glass. They picked up the receivers. I picked up mine. For a long moment, there was only the static hiss of the line. "You look well," Marcus said finally. His voice was scratchy and used. There was no warmth in it, only a dry observation. "I'm surviving," I said. Elena wouldn't look at me. She stared at a scratch on the table, picking at it with a fingernail. "Why are you here, Elias? To gloat? To see the animals in the zoo?" "I came to ask why," I said simply. "Not about the money. Not about the fraud. But why Julian? Why order him to die? He was your son." Marcus leaned forward, his eyes hard and unrepentant. "Julian was weak. He was going to break. And if he broke, everything we built, the pub, the network, the legacy, would have been gone. We did it for the family." "The family," I repeated, shaking my head slowly. "You keep using that word. But you don't know what it means. You didn't build a legacy, Dad. You built a graveyard. We gave you everything." Elena snapped, her head jerking up, eyes flashing with sudden, erratic anger. "A roof over your head. Food on the table. And you repaid us by putting us in here. You chose strangers over your own blood." "I chose the truth," I said. "The truth." Marcus sneered. "The truth is you were always jealous of him. You were jealous that he was the favorite, that he had the charm, and you were just the plotter, the boring one. You killed him out of spite, Elias. Don't pretend it was justice." I looked at them. Really looked at them. For years, I had sought their approval. I had become a detective to make them proud, to show them I was worthy of the name Thorn. I had lived in Julian's shadow, desperate for a crumb of the affection they lavished on him. But looking at them now, bitter, twisted, incapable of taking responsibility even as they rotted in a cell, I realized the truth. It wasn't that I wasn't good enough. It was that they were incapable of love. They loved Julian only as an extension of themselves, a tool to be used. And when the tool broke, they discarded it. The weight that had sat on my shoulders for 6 months, perhaps for 36 years, suddenly evaporated. "You're right about one thing," I said, my voice calm, devoid of anger. "I am different from you. And that is the greatest victory of my life." I stood up. "Where are you going?" Elena cried out, panic finally edging into her voice. "We have 20 minutes left. You can't just leave us." "I have nothing left to say to you," I said. "You have 30 years to talk to each other. Goodbye." I hung up the phone. As I walked toward the exit, I could see Marcus shouting silently behind the glass, his face red, banging his fist on the table. But I didn't look back. The heavy steel door clanged shut behind me, sealing them in their past. I walked out into the Manchester sunlight. It was weak and watery, but it felt like the warmest sun I had ever felt. 2 weeks later, I walked into the chief constable's office and placed my badge and gun on the desk. "You're sure about this, Elias?" he asked. "You're the best financial investigator we have. You're a hero to the new recruits." "That's why I'm leaving," I said. "I don't want to chase the bad guys anymore. I want to stop them before they start. I've accepted a position at the police academy, teaching ethics and financial investigation." "Teaching?" He raised an eyebrow. "It's a quiet life." Quiet is exactly what I need. I didn't want the adrenaline anymore. I didn't want the 3 a.m. raids or the cold bodies on concrete floors. I wanted to build something. 5 years later. The cottage was miles away from Manchester, nestled in the rolling hills of the Peak District. The air here didn't smell of rain and exhaust, it smelled of cut grass and damp earth. I stood on the porch, a mug of tea in my hand, watching the garden. Sarah was kneeling by the flower beds, pruning the roses. But my eyes were on the two boys tumbling around on the lawn. Leo and Sam. My twins. They were 4 years old, a whirlwind of energy and laughter. Careful, Sam, Sarah called out, laughing. Sam, the younger by 2 minutes, was chasing a butterfly. He didn't see the terracotta plant pot near the edge of the patio. His foot caught it. The sound was sharp in the peaceful afternoon. The pot shattered, spilling dark soil and a crushed geranium across the stones. Silence fell over the garden. Sam froze. He looked at the broken shards, then up at me. His lower lip trembled. His eyes went wide with fear. He hunched his shoulders, bracing himself for the shout, for the anger. I saw myself in him. I saw the 8-year-old Elias who dropped a plate in the kitchen of the Weaver's Arms and was made to scrub the floor while Marcus screamed that I was clumsy and useless. The memory flared, hot and painful, but I stamped it out instantly. I set my tea down and walked down the steps. I knelt in front of Sam, ignoring the dirt ruining my jeans. "I'm sorry, Daddy," Sam whispered, tears spilling over. "I didn't mean to." I reached out. I didn't point a finger. I didn't scold. I pulled him into a hug, holding him tight against my chest. "I know you didn't, Sammy," I said softly, smoothing his hair. "It's just a pot. It's just dirt. We can fix it." I pulled back and wiped the tears from his cheeks with my thumb. "Are you hurt?" He shook his head, sniffing. "No." "Then it's okay," I smiled. "Accidents happen. Look, Leo is going to help us clean it up, aren't you, Leo?" Leo ran over, grabbing a dustpan. "I'll help. I'm the best helper." I watched them working together, sweeping up the soil, laughing as a worm wiggled away. There was no fear in their eyes. No resentment. No competition for affection. Sarah walked over and rested her hand on my shoulder. She squeezed gently. She knew what I was thinking. "You're a good father, Elias," she whispered. I looked at my dirty hands, then at my son's. The iron ledger was gone. The thorn legacy of crime and cruelty had ended in a prison cell in Manchester. Here, in this garden, a new legacy had begun. One built not on blood money or loyalty, but on kindness. "I'm trying," I said, standing up and taking her hand. "You're succeeding." I watched the boys run back onto the grass, their laughter rising into the clear blue sky. For the first time in my life, the silence wasn't heavy. It was full of peace. The cycle was broken. And I was finally free.